in the lesson study, for those of you who weren't here, we learned that the first decision you make can be changed. But once it's changed, it's going to become established. And you'll see what I mean. When I think about faith, faith is a subject that we talk very little about, even though we talk about it. And yet it's one of the most used words by Christ whenever he spoke about his disciples, or to his disciples. And most of the time he would say, "O ye of lots of faith." No, he would say, "O ye of little." Now, if we were there, would you be saying that of us? Because I read that Jesus says that if you had the faith of a mustard seed, what could you do to a mountain? You could move a mountain. How many of you moved mountains lately? Yesterday, I was at a storage container that I have. And there's a man there, a good young man, but having experienced hard times. He's an IT specialist, but when COVID hit him, he kind of lost his job. And we've been chatting, and he makes crops. He makes penguins out of wood. And he actually has a little program put together which is quite unique, where he actually gives you a mold that's not quite complete, but he helps you to actually finish it off. You paint the mold. You've got to paint where the white should be and where the black should be, and you actually finish off your own penguin. Really a clever idea. You know, getting children involved in a gift. And it's not easy. There's a lot of sawdust when he's grinding away at the things. And as I said, he's had a hard time, so he really turns every penny he has. And recently, he came to me and he said, "Do you know anybody that would be interested in a planing machine as a planer and circular saw?" And I've been actually for quite a while had my eyes all looking for something, but they're very expensive, and they're also not. They are DIYs. You know what DIYs are? You do it yourself, and those do-it-yourself things don't work commercially. They work as long as you pay them on the cost. And so I thought, okay, well, let me go along. He took me to, and there was this thing, and it was a sturdy piece of metal, something I'd been looking at, and I looked and I thought, I wonder how much he's wanting for this, because it's really what I want. And I said to him, well, this is something I might be interested in myself. What do you want? What do you want? And the price he gave me, well, he didn't initially give me a price. I said, think about your price. It was in bad condition, rusty, not working. I saw the motor was working on it, but it needed attention. But I said, give me a price. And by that time, which is not even 10 seconds later, by the time I got to my storage, beep, beep, a message came up on me. I would like to consider this now. And I looked at him and thought, he has no clue what he has in his hand. So I went back to him and I said, you need to go do some homework. Because what you're asking for, I'm not willing to give you that. You know, we always try to bargain people down, eh? Makes me think of that scripture in the Bible where you go and you bargain a person down and you walk away and say, yeah, I made a profit, yeah. But I said, I'm not willing to pay you that amount for that issue. And I walked away and said, do your homework. So I went and I did some more homework for myself. So I said, tomorrow I will give you my advice. I said, but I want you to go and think about it. I want you to go and see where you started. You know, and I found out that desperate people do desperate things. And I picked up people who needed money. And you know, the interesting thing is I've been there. I know what it's like when you've got something that is really valuable, but other people take advantage of you. And I was talking to the Lord and said, please help him to change his foundation. You know, dear saints, you are children of God, the King of the universe. That's what you are. Not maybe, that's what you are. And don't allow any person, that includes the devil, to get you to think otherwise. You see, his problem was he had such a low opinion of his position that he didn't consider that even the stuff that he had that was valuable to be valuable. And I recognized as I spoke to him that I needed to change his thinking about himself. So anyway, the next day, he came and he looked at me and he said, you know, you told me you're not willing to give me. I said, yes, I'm not willing to give that. I said, I want to give you more. You should have seen his face. I said to him, what you got is worth more than what you asked. I said, can I give you more? And he said, yes. I said, because it's worth it. And I gave him more. And he left there and I could see there was a kind of spring in his bicycle pedal. I could ride on the bicycle. He was like, right. And I took the gift that I got from him, cleaned it up, got it working, and it works beautiful, worth everything. But I made a decision that I'm going to give you more. Yesterday, I'm at my storage busy. He comes pedaling with his bicycle, turns, makes a U-turn. And I say, how's it going? He said, no good. And then I saw his face. And his lips started to quiver. And I looked at him. A man desperate. A man who had no value of himself. I looked at him and I said to him, when you really talk. And for a few moments he couldn't speak. And I was talking to God. Saying to him, what's wrong here? And I found out that he said, I'm coming to say goodbye. So I said, why? What's happening? He says, I can't carry on. I'm leaving on Monday. So I looked at him, I said, he said, do you owe money to the people that are here? No. He says, by the end of this month, I will settle all my outstanding debt. So I said, what's your reason? I said, you stayed on the premises, you got the storage, it's not costing us difference, really nothing, but he has to have 4,000 rand. That's what it costs him to live. And I looked at him and I said, there must be a way in which you can get 4,000 a year. That you can do that. And I said to him, I want to say this, and I said to him, I want to say this to you. You've got stock, don't you? Yes, penguins and all. I said, I want you to do me a favour. By Monday, I want you to give me a record, a catalogue of what you have. What is the price that is sellable, that's fair, against each of those items. Let's see what you've got in stock. And while we were talking there, I said to him, he told me he made little garden things that you put in to say what kind of herbs or things you got. And recently he sold, I can't remember how many, but he got, I think, 300 rand for each of them, because they were specialised made. And he had made 2,000 rand. So he said, I just realised that I've got about 12 of those in storage. And what I was doing for him was to change his thinking, to make him see himself more than what he was. And by the time he left me, he was on the crowd again. But I realized that sometimes they have mountaintop experiences that, just a few days before he was pedaling that bicycle like everything was all right. And there he was, not even a few days later, back in the bank. And I said to him, look, I want to help you. I want to help you to be successful. Because I said, you're a man that I can see has got wonderful ethics. You really are the person I'd like to see improve. So I've taken him on myself, but what I realized that my first work will be is to change his thinking about himself. And then after that, to establish him in the correct pathway. You see, because the Bible tells me there is a pathway that seems right to man, but it ends in destruction. And so it's a matter of taking him, getting him to see value what you're doing, and establishing in that pathway. And to establish a person in a pathway doesn't always mean it's going to go good. You never help a person by taking away problems. I always think of trees. A tree only sets its taproot down deep when the wind's blowing on it. But when should you start putting the taproot down? In the beginning. While you're still a small little tree, you put that taproot down into the soil. Deep, so that no matter how hard the wind blows, you've established the root. And I realized that we need to be established in the taproot. You made a decision for Christ. That decision needs to sink deep into the rock. And the only way that taproot will sink deep is when you're experiencing the winds of life blowing against you. There's an old saying, the tallest trees get the most wind. Sometimes people look at business and they just think, those rich people. But there's a lot of wind that's been blowing on them. And they've had to establish patterns to make sure that they are solid. And dear friends, one of the things I want to tell you that we need to start being what we were before is people of the Word. When I asked the children, when was the last time you read the Bible, I'm not going to ask you that. You see, Hebrews 11 verse 1 says, faith is confidence in what we hope for. I have to take this man, I have to change him from a person who has such little value of himself to make him realize you can do something. I mean, if you've got hands and you've got feet, you can already put the food in your mouth. You can already do that. But some people don't even see that they can do that. One person once said to me, the best helping hand is the one at the bottom of your own arm. He needs to learn that. Dear friends, you need to learn that your best way is to work at your salvation with fear and trembling. And I'm really hoping that if you're not doing that, that there will be so much wind blowing on you that you will be forced to do it. That you will finally say, God, you better help me now because I'm just out of my league. Because at least then you're on your knees and you're approaching the right source for guidance. And I wonder how many of you sitting here find yourself in the same situation I found myself in yesterday. When people come to you and you can look into their lives and you can actually see more than what they're telling you. If you look carefully, you'll see a lot of quivering lips. People not knowing how to make ends meet anymore. And yet we should be those that are giving them light on their pathway. Because we receive the light. Thy word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. You see, your first point of departure is going to be what your faith will be built on. Did you hear me? If you're a person that has got no vision of yourself, no image of yourself, that foundation is such a terrible one to build your faith on. I always think of names, name giving, I think of Jacob. He got his name because he was an ankle grabber. He got his name because he tripped people up. That name stayed with him for the rest of his life. Imagine you could change that name. No wonder God said to you, no longer will your name be Jacob. It will be called Israel, one who has wrestled with God and was successful. You don't need the names that they give. We are counseling. Each of us is going to receive a new name. And I realize that faith can only grow on what is established. And the word counsels me so clearly that faith comes by hearing. This faith that will help you to move mountains comes by hearing. And not just hearing the words of people, but hearing what God's word has to say about that particular item. I asked the question in the lesson study, when the financial crisis should hit the world, which it's happening, what are you going to do? I'm really hoping that you will have established yourself in the Word by that time. And then I think of the two things that I discovered. One of the most amazing things that Hebrews 12 verse 1 says, well, let me read it to you. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. Listen to that. There are so many beautiful examples. The whole of Hebrews 11 is about people who've been successful in their faith growth. And you read of them. One of them was a harlot. Another word for prostitute. That somehow she changed her thinking. That she was in actual the granny in the long line of Christ's bloodline. That she was one of those people that even though she grew up in a time period where she was not what she should have been, she changed her thinking. And because of that decision and her establishing herself on that, she was a saved person. You think of Samson. Strong man when it came to strength, but weak in willpower. Women could just tell him what to do in the jail. Yet he could take the jawbone and kill a lot of men. But even Samson, by the power of God, changes his thinking. We have a cloud of witnesses of people who successfully, different than they're not successful people, they are people who started off with the odds against them to become the champions of faith. Hebrews 11 tells me that the first beginning of your experience when it comes to the faith of God is what we read in Hebrews 11 verse 6. And the word that catches my attention there is this word. Without faith it is impossible to please God. Difference. If faith is what you need to please God, then you should be working at getting that faith. And how do we get it? By listening to every word that comes out of the mouth of God. Implementing every word, no matter what it is. If it's got to do with business, implement God's word in it. If it's got to do with your social life, implement God's word. If it's got to do with your relationship to your spouse, implement God's counsel. As you do that, your faith will be established on a firm, solid rock foundation. That when the winds do come and when they do blow, you will be established in the Word. I can't stress the urgency of you taking time to study the Word of God. It's your safeguard against the changes of the world. If you do not do it, your faith is not going to be strong enough to carry. The first thing that I'm counseled is that I need to please God. And the way that I start is by this first thing, believing that God exists. And linked to that is that He rewards those who diligently seek His face. I want to end off my presentation by telling you a well-known story. I like to add on some colour to it. But I read in the Counsels of Ellen White about the journey of the child of God. And it starts off where everybody is walking on the broad roadway. Ladies wearing their high-heel shoes, comfortable. Men driving with fancy cars. Everybody, I'm talking Christians, I'm not talking people out in the world. I'm talking you and I who are comfortable in our life on planet Earth. we be blessed. But as life goes on, that roadway narrows. And as it narrows, also we find out that those big fancy cars that we had, gentlemen, we have to trade them in for a motorbike. But we make sure it's a hard one. Something good. But we still make our journey comfortable. Ladies, you have to kick off your high heel shoes because it's becoming a bit hard to walk in them, wobbling all over, so you put on flat shoes. I mean, this is something I've discovered. You know, when you're young, high heel shoes is like a thing. When you're older, I notice most ladies wear flat shoes. I wonder why. Is it because it's comfortable? It makes life a bit easier, isn't it? And so we do things to make life easier for yourself as you journey on the road. But I've got bad news for you. The road even gets narrower than that. Till finally it's so important that you should actually feel the stones that you're walking on, and you have to discard the shoes, ladies. And you have to walk so that you actually can feel where you're walking. Gentlemen, by this time, you've got a kiddie maybe, a walking stick helping you along your journey. But the pathways become so narrow that before you were walking with maybe people all on your side, but it's narrowed down until finally you're walking maybe two along one another, and the one person bumps you, and on this side here is this cliff. It's like far down there. And on this side, it's like, no, this is the canyon, sorry, this is the cliff on this side. You're walking and it's against the edges, and a person bumps you. You know what that little bump is like sometimes when you're walking, and just bump, and you're just at the moment where about to put your foot, and it almost makes you stumble, and you turn around and you get because they're careful. And you're walking, and finally you realize that there's a little stream hanging. Now, this stream is very great. In the beginning, you don't think so. Little stream. But I don't know how many of you have ever experienced what a little stream can do when you're just about to lose your balance. It's a strong little piece of string. It doesn't just break easy. But as you grab that string, it almost strangely helps you to keep your balance. We hike a lot. Sometimes I get to a place in the pathway and you need some help to go, and this is a little piece of grass stub. And you reach out and grab that grass stub, and the first thing you check is, and that little grass stub is enough to give you just a little lift up. That's what this string is like. And this little string is going to become very valuable to you. Because you see, as you walk and the pathway becomes more and more narrow, you find that you're starting to hold on to the string a little bit more. And the incredible thing is that this string is starting to become thicker. It's becoming something that you can rely on. And you're holding on. And as you walk, you realize that the only way that you're going to stay on this pathway is to hold on. Those who don't hold on are going to fall down. They're going to go down into the abyss, and you actually hear some people go, this is too much, and then they go off the street. But that's not the end of the story. Finally, it's so narrow, and you're holding onto the string like anything because that's the only way you're going to manage. And then the worst thing ever in your life happens. There's no pathway. You've come to a massive gulf. But as you look over there on the other side, you actually see the promised land. And you realize the only way you're going to get to the promised land is by holding on to the rope and swinging across. Ellen White counsels us that that rope is your faith. Dear friends, grow your faith. And God will help you do that. the righteous will walk by faith. I'm hoping for this young man. He really indicated to me in a little bit of the ways I spoke to him that he believes in God. First step. And he needs to learn that God is also the owner of the cattle of 1,000 hills. And all the silver and gold is his. And he gives it to whom he pleases. He said to Nebuchadnezzar, I've made you the head of gold. I ordained you to be that. He said to Lucifer, I ordained you to be a carpenter. And dear friends, he has ordained you to be children of the King. The King of Kings. And that's what you are. I'm hoping that through little things that you read, through messages that you hear, that you will grow your foundation, that you will believe in God, because this is life eternal, that they might know the one true God and Jesus Christ, whom He is.